Hello, my name is Laura Hattersley and this is episode 9 of the CASK podcast, and today I'm going to talk to you about CASK disorders and epilepsy. So yesterday, March the 26th, was Purple Day. For those of you that don't know, Purple Day is an international day to raise awareness and bring awareness to epilepsy. It's actually only officially recognised as an official day in Canada, but throughout the epilepsy community, you will have seen, if you go on social media, lots of people kind of celebrating, might be the wrong word, but like prioritising Purple Day, wearing purple, and purple is generally the colour that we all associate with epilepsy. So Purple Day was originally created in 2008 by a girl called Cassidy Megan in Canada, and it has just grown. So it's a grassroots organisation, and I think it's just a really cool story because it shows what one individual can do if they put their mind to it and how much change they can create. Epilepsy is really underfunded, especially the rare epilepsies. Epilepsy, as we know, is very hard to treat, but today I wanted to talk to you about how epilepsy impacts our community. Now, I know that it is a topic many people want to know more about. Epilepsy is something that is feared within our community. So let's have a look at some of the actual science and what is actually known about CASK and epilepsy. If you follow our social media, you will have seen that we started putting up some bits of information, and there'll be some more for the rest of the week. So if I just go through them one by one, just to explain, and then to talk about what more information is needed, and also it'd be great if anybody has any questions, put them, you can comment either on our social media or wherever you hear this podcast. Any questions you think need to be answered about CASK and epilepsy. So obviously the most common question, I guess, is how common is epilepsy in people with CASK disorders? Now, we're really fortunate that the Cambridge University study that was concluded in the summer, you can read it. It is in preprint, but it is waiting to be formally published at the moment. They did a literature study. So what a literature study is, it looks at all the literature, all the published literature that is out on CASK disorders, and they maybe look at just particular aspects that they are interested in. And fortunately for us, they did look at epilepsy. So any study that has mentioned CASK and epilepsy, they took that information and they compiled it all together to give us a larger picture. So obviously one study would just look at a small cohort, but by looking at many studies, you'll get a much larger cohort. And what they found was that the published literature shows that about 50% of people with a CASK disorder go on to develop epilepsy. Now, I then thought, well, let's see what our community data says, because that isn't published, so that wouldn't have been part of that literature review. And we obviously have our data collection program called RareX, which has been going for some years now. So I had a look at the latest information we've had, which was in January. So there will be hopefully, if people have been filling in their surveys, we'll have a bit larger sample size now. But in January, the number stood at about 44%. So 44% of patients enrolled on RareX currently have a diagnosis of, seizures, I think it is the specific term they use, not epilepsy, but has seizures, and a greater proportion have abnormal EEGs. So I guess the second question might be, well, if my child is now 5 or 6, does that mean they're not going to get epilepsy? Can I breathe a sigh of relief? And obviously that we want the answer to be yes, but sadly looking at the data, the answer is no. So from, again, the Cambridge University study, it looks like children and adults with a CASK mutation can acquire epilepsy at pretty much any age. So this is something that our families, parents and clinicians always need to be alert to. And that's why information like this is really important, because people are given misinformation because I think quite often with rare diseases, perhaps rare epilepsies, you have a time window, and then once you're out of it, you're not, the chances are you're not going to get epilepsy. That doesn't seem to be the case with our community, sadly. I guess another thing people want to know is, and they want to know, like, how feared do we need to be of the epilepsy? So obviously epilepsy in its own right, seizures are very debilitating in terms of lifestyle. So if they happen overnight, you're up all night, your child's then tired, it affects the whole family. If they happen during the day, they could happen when you're out. Do you need emergency medicines? Is it going to stop activities? So, epilepsy in its own right is very kind of traumatic and destabilizing. But is epilepsy actually physically impacting our children in terms of cognitively, for example? And the information out there does seem to suggest, well, the latest information, which again was the Cambridge University study, did find a link, a positive correlation between epilepsy and intellectual disability severity. However, I just want to say that there is no way to show if this is a causal link. So what I mean by that is, just because the chances are if you have seizures, your intellectual disability and your general abilities are going to be lower, doesn't mean one is causing the other. So, and that's going to be something that's always going to be really, really difficult to find out. So is it that the epilepsy is causing some kind of brain damage and impacting our children and causing these problems? Or is it that the children who are more severe anyway in terms of intellectual development and maybe have, more brain malformations, is it that is leading to the seizures? So I just want to that's a really important point, because I don't want people to be going around telling people, the seizures are damaging my child. We don't know that, but there is definitely a link between adaptive ability and whether you have seizures based on this study. But as with all studies, you always need backup studies to confirm and corroborate. I guess another question would be, what kind of seizures are common? I think most people are probably aware within our community, but again, clinicians won't be aware necessarily, because this information isn't out in the kind of more formal medical website. So it's on all our websites now. So I think if you go onto any CASK charity's website where they have information about epilepsy, you're going to find fairly accurate information about the kind of seizures. But if you go on, the NHS information or the equivalent abroad, you're not going to get this information. So just so you all know when it's out there, infantile spasms or epileptic spasms seem to be the most common. That's based on our Rare X data, and I think that is published in quite a few places as well. But also our children can have generalised and focal seizures. So focal, I'm not an epilepsy expert, by the way, but my daughter has epilepsy, so I've kind of learnt along the way. But focal, I believe, is when the seizure is coming from a certain part of the brain. So they can often just affect like one side of the face or one side of the body, as opposed to generalised, which could be all over the brain. And also, quite a lot of our children are diagnosed with myoclonic epilepsies. Now, I'm not going to go into detail because, as I said, I'm not an expert, but they're the kind of seizures that are most common and that we should be looking out for. And okay, if your child ends up with epilepsy, what are the best drugs? Can it be controlled? Now, there's never been a study looking at which drugs help our children the most. I believe that there is one ongoing, which will hopefully give us some answers to this. But based on the information that's currently out there, it seems really variable. So some individuals will gain control of their seizures, others won't. And it probably depends on which seizures they're having. But again, there hasn't ever been an in-depth study on this. So I'm very looking forward to the epilepsy study that is being done in America at the moment and seeing the results of that, because that will really help answer that question. Now, again, we know that some of our children have MIC-PCH and some of our children have just been diagnosed with microcephaly, and probably it would be called XLID with or without nystagmus. So if your child doesn't have the MIC-PCH, are they at a lower risk of seizures? So the current information out there is like, yes. Based on the Bingo, which is the Cambridge University study, they found only 33% of those just diagnosed with microcephaly and CASK had seizures, whereas 54% of those with MIC-PCH had seizures. And just to kind of come back around to the prevalence of epilepsy, and obviously it's lower in our RareX data than it is in the published data. Obviously, because of the fact that our children, it looks like they can get epilepsy at any age, you've got a potential problem with RareX if the majority of RareX participants are young. So if they haven't lived their whole lives, we don't know. They're saying no, they don't have epilepsy, but maybe they will get epilepsy, and the likelihood is some of those in the RareX cohort will go on to get epilepsy. So obviously that is why I believe the number is lower at 44%, because there'll be a lot of young children that are yet to develop epilepsy. So really you need kind of a study on, I don't know, just adults with CASK, but I don't think you'd ever have a sample size large enough at the moment, and then say, well, have they ever had epilepsy? And that would give us probably the most accurate prevalence number. But anyway, I've run over a little bit. There is obviously a lot to say about CASK or epilepsy. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions. We do have a neurologist that works with us. He was obviously an expert in epilepsy. So I'm going to leave it there. But yes, happy Purple Day for yesterday. And please, message me with any questions.